things. So every day, I surrender to the fact that I have an eclectic personality. That is, I have a million things I'm interested in. There's a million things, and before I used to think, no, you have to just focus on one thing. And after a while, I give up and just decide, I'm going to read about psychology today, or I'm going to read the funny papers today, or I'm going to read history today, or I'm going to read science today, I'm going to do something completely different today, or art. So usually the things I do have all those components combined. But they're centered on this. They're centered on how they fit into what we call the divine principle, was an explanation of biblical passages, of physical sciences explaining the universe that we live in, of our bodies, of our heart, of the history of Judeo-Christianity, and by the way, the history of Greek Judeo-Christianity. We acknowledge that Greeks are a big part of what happened to the Christian church and the Christian movement. So divine principle is a revelation for the 21st century, trying to explain to people in the 21st century a perspective of biblical, or really theology, that can make sense in the world we live in today, right? So also today's June the 25th. The Korean War started this day 65 years ago, June 25th, 1950. Or I guess it's 67 years ago now. When North Korean tanks crossed the 38th parallel, the boundary with South Korea, right? So this was clearly a war of aggression of North Korea against the South. U.S. President Harry Truman was visiting his friends and supporters in his home state when he received a telephone call from Secretary of State then Dean Acheson. Okay, here's what happened. We all understand that from 1905 until 1945, Korea had been annexed by Japan. When Japan lost the war, the Allies were trying to decide what to do with Korea. So they decided to split Korea. The Russians joined the war against the Japanese, so they said, we get to deserve some part of the Japanese Empire. And so they took the north of the 38th parallel, that was Soviet territory, and south was American territory. So when this war happened, Korea was actually a territory of the United States. It was a protectorate under the protection of the United States until Korea could make their own democracy, which they did eventually, right? So when that happened, President Truman and the Americans and the United Nations had to react. And this is what President Truman said. He said, this is from Time magazine, in Korea, the government forces which were armed to prevent border raids and preserve internal security were attacked by invading forces from North Korea. The Security Council of the United Nations called upon the invading troops to cease hostilities and to withdraw through the 38th parallel. This they have not done, but on the contrary have pressed the attack. The Security Council called upon all members of the United Nations to render every assistance to the United Nations in the execution of this resolution. In these circumstances, I have ordered the United States Air and Sea Forces to give the Korean government troops cover and support. He didn't call in the Marines yet, by the way, at the beginning. They didn't know what they were going to do. The attack upon Korea makes it plain beyond all doubt that communism has passed beyond the use of subversion to conquer independent nations and will now use armed invasion and war. So Truman was quoting from an understanding that they called the domino effect. They thought if communists, Russian, Soviet Union, or China takes North Korea and then takes South Korea, the next step is Japan and Taiwan. And so the idea was if we stop communism here at the 38th parallel, we'll protect all of Southeast Asia, right? It says, it has defied the orders of the Security Council of the United Nations issued to preserve international peace and security. In these circumstances, the occupation of Formosa by communist forces would be a direct threat to the security of the Pacific area and the United States forces performing their lawful and necessary functions in that area. See, Formosa is now called Taiwan, which is now really called Republic of China, right? There's nationalist China, which is Taiwan, and then there's communist China, two Chinas. So that's why he wrote this. He thought if they take South Korea, they'll take Formosa, and then they'll go to Japan next. So that's what happened. So these are memorials, right? This is a memorial for the U.S. servicemen who died in Korea. Of course, they drove the North Koreans back, and there's an armistice. This is the Korean War Memorial in Korea, by the way. They made this giant Korea, and there's a big cemetery behind it where many Americans and United Nations forces are interred, right? So, this is in Carolina, I believe. This is Cumberland County Veterans Killed in Action. So these were Americans who went from this part of the world and went to Korea to defend what we call freedom, right? Now, if you read this, it says, if you love freedom like Americans like freedom, that is freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom to own personal property, if you like that, then you'll admire this memorial. That makes sense? Those courageous young men and women went and actually died to save Korean, Japanese, Taiwanese freedom, right? On the other hand, this is really important about this. This is the truth about love. On the other hand, if you're a person who loves Marxist socialism, then you hate this memorial. And you hate the United States. And when you see this memorial, it makes you mad and angry that these imperialist Yankee dogs saved South Korea from North Korean freedom of Marxist socialism. You understand the difference? Some people love this memorial. I admire this memorial, and I admire the men who experienced the ultimate sacrifice for the freedom of not only South Korea, but for millions of people around the world, including ourselves. But people who like Marxist socialism, they hate that memorial. They don't honor it. They don't stand up for the flag. They don't put their hearts over their chest when we sing the Star-Spangled Banner, and they hate America. So you have to understand that. On the other hand, no one has been more grateful to the U.S. Armed Forces than Reverend Moon himself. Remember in 2012, he sent the Little Angels Korean folk dance group all around the world to thank the U.S. Armed Forces for their part in saving not only himself, but also 55 million South Koreans who now live in prosperity, right? And saving the Republic of China, Japan, and the world from communist tyranny. So Reverend Moon was grateful for that act. And June 25th is many years later. Remember, even here in San Diego, there's John Kenny. We went to there's also a memorial in Camp Pendleton for Marines from Camp Pendleton who fought and died in South Korea. Did you know that? Here's John Kenny. Here's Colonel Pak, Pastor Frank, and Reverend Jong, I believe his name is. And this is the Korean memorial, the Chosin River Reservoir Memorial for Marines from Camp Pendleton who fought, some died, some lived in South Korea. And then here's the Enyart family, here's Pastor Frank, here's Elizabeth, here's a few of our brothers and sisters. And this was at the San Diego program, right? Father sent all these people and Colonel Pak to go all over the world, to all the countries that offered, like Canada, England, many countries, 16 countries offered soldiers to defend them. Other countries like Japan offered not soldiers, but materials. So I think there was 32 countries involved. But he sent them everywhere and honored these men who bravely fought for their safety, for their freedom, right? All these old guys who were Korean War veterans or helpers. Okay. Reverend Moon himself during the war was in Hungnam prison during most of the war. How do we know that? If why should you believe that? Here's why I think you should believe that. Because we have eyewitness testimony from Reverend Wonpil Kim, and many of us have met Reverend Kim and found him to be the most genuine, humble, and loving person we ever met. So all of us old-timers met Reverend Kim would know he would never lie to us. He says when he saw Reverend Moon in Hungnam prison during that time, you can be absolutely certain that's a perfect eyewitness testimony, undisputed. Reverend Moon was there. I only say that because there's lots of negativity and lots of people saying, oh, it never happened, and terrible lies like that. But whenever you go to court, the impeccability or character of the witness is really, really important. Who says what, right? If Wonpil Kim said it, I believe it's 100% true. He said, about a year after Father was put in prison, I was able to see him one morning as his group marched to the factory. He was holding the hands of those beside him and looking down as he walked. As I was looking at Father, he somehow recognized me with his eyes. He signaled me to come closer, and I waited for him along the way where his group was to pass. As his line went by, Father asked me about the members. However, if it had been discovered that Father had give and take with me, he would have been severely tortured. I was not aware of that danger at the time. Only later did I find out, right? So when Reverend Moon was in prison, what was his first concern for Wampil Kim? The church members, the membership. This is what this means. We sing the song, "In this world embittered with hate." Through the thousands of years, Father was searching to find someone triumphant in heart where he struggled, behold, footprints stained with blood. This is the history of true love in the world. There's a world embittered with hate. There's a heavenly side led by Jesus, the saints, I believe Reverend Moon, Mrs. Moon, who suffered unbelievably to teach us about true love, to bless marriages, to raise second, third, fourth generation children in true love. They spent blood and sacrifice learning and making the conditions and foundation to do this, right? That's what this song is about, by the way. So, Reverend Moon, when he was in Hungnam prison, says very clearly they tortured him and beat him for him to learn communism. They all had to study. So Reverend Moon taught about his experience with communism through Khalsa. I have a copy of the Khalsa manual. If anybody, well, you can't have it. Oh, we have some downstairs, by the way. This is the Khalsa manual. We went all over teaching these ideas, which were a critique and counter-proposal to Marxist socialism, right? And this was taught all over the world in an ideological battle. Reverend Moon said this was a hot war, but more, it was an ideological battle. He said, Reverend Moon said, the source of the Korean War, Bolshevik Revolution, and millions of other atrocities is the ideology of conflict. An ideology of conflict, right? These wars and atrocities were not made due to cause. What does that mean? It means this. Listen, North Korea was not fighting in self-defense, fighting South Korea or the United States. South Koreans were just poor. They were barely trying to make a living. They were not attacking. See, if somebody attacks you and you defend yourself and fight back, that's with cause. That's legitimate. But these guys, okay, but were pure, this is a pure fabrication of ideology. They thought they should attack just because they should overcome and rule a different group of people, right? Marxist, communist atheism claims that the universe, life, etc., are simply the result of random chance, and that there's no intelligent creator, there's no loving creator, there's only material is important, food, drink, housing, and private property and religion. Food, drink, and housing are important, and private property and religion is the enemy of prosperity to them. So what do you do with an enemy? You attack them and kill them. So that's why the North attacked the South and continues to threaten the South. Khalsa Manual teaches Godism, right, as opposed to atheism. This is, so there's many atheists. This is, The God Delusion is a best-selling nonfiction book by English biologist Richard Dawkins. Anybody read that book? I read part of it, and I read a couple of his other ones, too. He's a professorial fellow at New College, Oxford, former holder of the church. So he teaches atheism. He's an enemy of theism. He's an enemy. He hates religion, right? In The God Delusion, Dawkins contends that supernatural creator almost certainly does not exist, and that belief in a personal God, little g, qualifies as a delusion, which he defines as a persistent false belief held in the face of strong contradictory evidence, right? He goes this, he is sympathetic to Robert Pirsig's statement that when one person suffers from a delusion, it is called insanity. But when many people suffer from a delusion, it is called religion. Right? You should understand, this person, these people think you're insane. What do you do with insane people? You lock them up, right? There's whole nations that are locking up religious people because of this ideology. There's whole nations where people are being locked up, killed, tortured because of this ideology. And if they could get you, they could get you too, by the way. So he declines to, he no longer debates with Christians, creationists. He wouldn't debate with someone like Francis Collins, right? He wouldn't debate with them. He says it's because, well, I just don't like to because they don't need to get credit from me, right? But it's not really true. The reason Dawkins doesn't debate is because mostly he loses the debates. This is a headline from an Anglican from Cambridge University. Richard Dawkins loses debate against former Anglican head Rowan Williams at Cambridge University. You know what Cambridge University is? That's where Newton went to college. Wow. It was called Trinity College then in Cambridge. And this is Anglican head, right? He's the leader of the Anglicans, Rowan Williams. Here's what happened. Dawkins lost the debate by 324 votes to 136, right? That's a terrible defeat, right? That's like getting an F on your test, right? You're in the lower 1/5 division. As he failed to convince the House that religion has no place in humanity's life. Here's what Mr. Williams pointed out. Religion has always been a matter of community building, a matter of building relations of compassion, fellow feeling, and I dare say it, inclusion, right? That's us. We want everybody to be here. Williams pointed out that respect for human life and equality was inherent in all organized religion. The very concept of human rights has profound religious roots, like I always teach ending of slavery. All those things came from religion. The convention of human rights would not be what it is here were it not for history of philosophical religious debate. For example, what about women's right to vote? Should women have the right to vote? No, Christian women got that to take place. If women were in a Marxist, socialist country, would you have the right to vote? Yeah, but it wouldn't mean anything because Marxist, socialist countries don't have popular elections. Stalin just stays until Borgia kills him. And then Khrushchev just stays until somebody else kills him. And so in Cuba, you could vote for the president, but it's always Fidel Castro or his brother Raul Castro. It's always the same. Your vote makes no difference. There are no women's rights in socialist Marxist government systems. Anyway, you're getting me off track. Now, according to the Amazon.com UK website, the book led to a 50% growth in their sales of books on religion and spirituality. Thank you, Reverend Dawkins, and a 120% increase in sales of the Bible. So I'd say he was a total loser myself, but you can make that decision for yourself. We think atheism doesn't make sense, and looking at scientists, we think we know why, right? Okay. Here's why I think so-called atheistic scientists don't make sense. Because people like Werner Heisenberg. Werner Heisenberg is the guy who gave us quantum physics, who understands quantum leap, who wrote the book on what quantum mechanics means, right? He was awarded in 1932 Nobel Prize in Physics. Not for something simple. He didn't invent a squirt gun. He figured out the micro world of the universe, right? When you hear about quantum leap, metaphysical physics, he's the guy who invented it. A genius amongst geniuses, right? Here's what he says. He says the first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist, like Dawkins. But at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. So Heisenberg, maybe one of the smartest men ever to live, especially in the 20th century when there was a lot of geniuses. He is personal friends with Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr. He knew all those guys. He worked with them, right? In his autobiographical article in the journal Truth, Henry Margenau, professor emeritus of physics and natural philosophy at Yale University, pointed out, there were, however, a few experiences I cannot forget. One was my first meeting with Heisenberg, who came to America soon after the end of the Second World War. Our conversation was intimate, and he impressed me by his deep religious conviction. He was a true Christian in every sense of the word. Is that a good witness for you? Yes. Is that a good witness? Greatest mind, one of the greatest minds of the 20th century. So, and here's, to me, this is what happens to me naturally. Here's the scientific capability of Dawkins. About there. He didn't do anything, by the way. He's not known for inventing, he didn't invent or discover anything. Here's Heisenberg, right, at the top. One of the 10 smartest people in all human history. He's here. He believes in God. he doesn't believe in God. Why would I care about his witness? Think about it. Why would you care about Dawkins' witness? Remember I said the character of the witness is really important. Here's what Heisenberg says. Where no guiding ideals are left to point the way, the scale of values disappears, and with it the meaning of our deeds and sufferings. And at the end can lie only negation and despair. Religion is therefore the foundation of ethics, and ethics the presupposition of life. He means life comes from ethics, right? Why did he say this? Because he lived in Nazi Germany in World War II. Here's his story. After Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, Heisenberg was attacked in the press as a white Jew by elements of the Deutsche Physik movement for his insistence on teaching about the roles of Jewish scientists. Who was the great Jewish scientist of his day? Albert Einstein, 1905, right? As a result, he came under investigation by the SS. Nevertheless, supporters of Deutsche Physik launched vicious attacks against leading theoretical physicists, including Arnold Sommerfeld and Heisenberg. On 29th of June 1936, a Nazi Party newspaper published a column attacking Heisenberg. On July 15th, 1937, he was attacked in a journal by the SS. Thus was the beginning of what he called the Heisenberg affair. You know what he did? He went to Sweden to work with Niels Bohr during all this crazy hatred, right? Here he is, greatest scientist in the world, and all these people are hating him. That's what he means by this. Because he was religious. He was a Judeo-Christian believer. Religion is therefore the foundation of ethics, and ethics the presupposition of life. And atheistic Nazism is the opposite of that. So these are people who lived through it and came through it believing in God. Does that make sense? I'm going to skip that one. Oh. You're making me mad. Why do we care if the greatest minds of science believe in God? And the greatest minds of science, by the way, believe in God. Because God cares about you. And you're designed to care about God. You're designed to care about God. There's another sermon, but there's a part of your physical brain that's tuned to spirituality. Okay? And God is a great source of love for you too. Also, because there are enemies of God, and there's enemies for your spiritual beliefs and spiritual existence. There are enemies of Christianity, enemies of true love, enemies of truth, and enemies of family, right? There's enemies for all these things. Reverend Moon was imprisoned by a communist dictator that hated religion, hated God in North Korea. Communists only see conflict. So we would ask, one of the questions we ask, why do some people see God in nature? For example, Dawkins is a scientist, but he sees no God. Heisenberg is a scientist, and he does see God. What's the difference? We're going to talk about that. It's about a little bit about how your mind is programmed. This is Engel's law of dialectics. And I thought, do you know what dialectics means? Anybody know? Dialectics, the dia is the same as in the word dialogue. But it doesn't mean to dialogue. It means to make an argument for what you think is the correct point. It's like a take no prisoners type of argument. Okay? Engels postulated three laws of dialectics from his reading of Hegel's Science of Logic. Engels elucidated these laws in his work called The Dialectics of Nature. Okay, first law of the dialectics of nature is the law of unity. The law of unity says everything should be united. It sounds familiar, right? Sounds like us. Everything should be united. So, for example, everyone should live in the ideal worker's paradise. But he believes there's conflict of opposites, right? The law of the passage of quantitative changes into qualitative changes. So the point of, I'll show you what that means. And then third, the law of negation of the negation. I'll show you what those things mean. Pretty simple. Come on. Okay, law of unity means that there is an ideal, and we have to get there. But there is a conflict of opposites. That is, to get to the kingdom of heaven, workers must go through owners. And there's no way to make peace between these. He says the only thing was called the negation of the negation. Since owners are negating the worker's paradise, we must negate the negation so that we can live in peace, unity, and worker's paradise. Right? That's what they think. The law of the passage of quantitative changes into qualitative changes means The oppression of workers gets worse and worse, causes so much pain and resentment, it builds up until there's violence and the negation of the negation. That means the law of the negation, the violence destroys the capitalists, and the workers' paradise begins. This is 100% what they believe. It's true. It sounds simple, right? But they think there's no other way to get to heaven except by destroying, negating whatever's blocking you. That's capitalism, that's the United States of America, that's the U.S. Marine Corps, that's all those different kinds of things, right? That's why you always see this. That's why when you read the newspapers today, all you see is women versus men, owners of companies versus employees, men and women, they see men and women as enemies. Atheism versus theism. Atheists are always against religion. They can't just think, well, you're religious, I'm not religious, let's just eat a hot taco together. They can't do that because of the negation of the negation. Science and religion become enemies. You read about it all the time, at least I do. Since there's no morality to Marxists, then destruction of your enemy at all costs is encouraged. So here's what it looks like, right? Sorry, this thing is not working well right now. Eggshells and chicks are enemies. This is from Marx's book. Eggshells and chicks are enemies. That is, the shell is oppressing the chick. It's oppressing him, putting him in a prison. The poor chick can't get out to eat and play and run around, right? The chick is saying, let me out. You shell, I hate you. You're imprisoning me and oppressing me. Then what happens is finally the chick gets so big, the quantitative change, the chick gets bigger, the quantity of the chick gets bigger and bigger until a qualitative change is accomplished. He destroys the shell, gets out, and then he gets to be just a chick playing around, right? So Marx saw this relationship as a war, and he sees all things as wars. He sees the sea at war with the land by crashing waves onto it. He sees everything is at war with one another, and then finally one side gets bigger and wins, right? However, Divine Principles answer using actual real science, eggshells and chicks are in fact harmonious. The shell is protecting the chick until the chick grows up. The eggshell protects the chick and allows it to breathe. As the chick grows, the calcium of the shell contributes to the bones of the chick. So the shell is actually sacrificing itself for the body of the chick, right? It becomes thinner and thinner and allows the chick to finally break through. The shell is actually sacrificing itself for the sake of the chick, right? This is what Reverend Moon saw in nature. Just like Heisenberg sees God in nature, and Dawkins doesn't see God, Marx sees conflict and violence in nature. Reverend Moon sees harmony and beauty and self-sacrifice and love in nature, right? What's the difference? Just perspective. And by the way, this is real science. Reverend Moon has real science on his side. And then chick is happy, shell's happy. Everybody's happy. Reverend Moon, by the way, graduated from Waseda University with a degree in electrical engineering. And he saw the universe as harmonious. Okay. He says this is Reverend Moon. The give and take action of a single proton and electron is the power of the sun lighting the heavens and warming the earth. So he sees electrons and protons. Marx sees the proton, gravitational or strong force holding on to the electron and not letting it go. And the electron is trying to flee, trying to get away from the big bully proton, right? Marx sees just violence in that relationship. Reverend Moon sees a type of love, a type of harmony of the universe, right? By the way, he would have studied the science of the time, which was Newton, Faraday, Priestley, Maxwell, Einstein, Tesla, and Rutherford. They were all writing when Reverend Moon was in college. All their things that they had done were already existing and written down. Reverend Moon must have read their papers and their ideas, right? By the way, all these guys are religious. Einstein probably was the least of them, but he clearly believed in God. Tesla, Rutherford were all religious. Priestley began the Unitarian Church. He was actually the founder of the Unitarian Church. Anyhow. So Reverend Moon, when he sees this, he sees the beauty of harmony and everything working together and sees all things as working together, and that's where progress comes from. Not from conflict or violence, but from love and everybody getting along together, right? So, Khalsa teaches that nature is not at war. Nature is in fact harmonious, and the harmony of these things, harmony of hydrogen brings warmth, light, energy, and life to the earth. If there was no sun, there'd be no life on the earth, right? So Reverend Moon sees harmony in your body, and he always gives these funny stories, which I like. For example, he says, you have two eyes that work together to achieve one focus, right? Marxists, I suppose, see your eyes at war with each other. But Reverend Moon sees your eyes are perfectly harmonious with your brain, right? He says there's only one focus. You don't see two images. Why does the eye focus automatically? He says this because before each eye ever existed, a concept or a design blueprint existed. The ability to focus didn't come to exist after the eye was created. It was part of the original plan for the eye. The eye was designed in a certain way to fulfill its purpose and proper focus. Makes sense, right? So your eyes are not at war with each other. In fact, you have a left eye, a right eye. What's next? You have a sight, something you want to see, like in nature. You see trees and you think they're beautiful, right? But it's centered on your mind, your brain, right? The idea of the eye requires that 2 points work together in harmony and unite with a third point. Actually, we see only the third point, but there is a fourth point which is invisible. It is within your brain. That is what engenders the ability to focus. The two eyes work together, unite with that third point, but there is a certain cause that makes it happen. So there are actually 4 points. So he says this, right? There's your mind, left eye, right eye, sight, beauty. Okay, come on back. This is what we call the four-position foundation. This four-position foundation is the foundation for everything in the universe. He says when you have an itch, this is Reverend Moon teaching. He used to teach us like this. When you have an itch someplace, do your hands argue about whose responsibility it is to scratch it? Does the left hand say, no, that's your territory, you scratch it. I'm not scratching down there. Is that what your hands say? Are your hands at war with your mind? No, of course not. That doesn't happen. He says you have an itch, right? You have an itch, and your mind feels the itch and tells your left hand or your right hand immediately scratch it, right? You don't even think about it. If you feel a bug biting you, your hand immediately stops that bug. Stop it. Quit biting me, right? Your hand doesn't say, I'm not touching that bug. Forget it. Let it bite your arm. Let it bite the foot. I don't care. I'm not touching that bug, right? We don't say that, right? We live in harmony. We live in the harmony of life. So we say it's the same with God. Do you have another battery, John? I think this one's dead. We have another thing we call God, husband and wife, and it fits the same pattern. It fits the same pattern. That is, we have a give and take action. A husband and wife should create children of true love. That's our goal. That's our ideal, to create children of true love. Right? So, our goal and our ideal is not conflict between men and women. We don't believe in it. It happens sometimes, but we don't believe in it. Thank you, John. Right? Our goal is harmony through what? Intellect, will, and our goal is love. Our goal is true love, sacrificial love between two persons. We say love is the goal of creation. Great scientists, great religious leaders have concluded that God is the source of morals and the chief of morality is love of others. That's what morality really means, is I love you at the sacrifice of myself. Right? How do we know? How do you know that's true? How do you know the Marxists aren't correct and we should just be fighting each other? Men and women should fight until one wins. Right? How do we know? So we say, if God designed us for love and the purpose of creation is love, then love fulfills the purpose of creation. Then we should see goodness when we find love, right? We should find goodness. Love should and will bring good results. That's what we say. If communists are correct, then conflict should bring good results. Then the more fighting men and women do, the more fighting fathers and mothers do, the better your children should become, right? The more fighting you do, the more stress you make for your spouse, the healthier you should become. Wouldn't that be correct? If the socialist communists were correct, we say no. We say Jesus is correct. The more love you give, the healthier, the happier, the better your children are. Right? Okay, so here's a book I wish we all would read and study. It's called Love and Survival, the scientific basis for the healing power of intimacy and love, as opposed to just curing disease, by Dr. Dean Ornish. It looks like this, right? Love and Survival. I've been reading it last week. He's a medical doctor, and he began to realize in his practice that just curing by giving you a pill or a shot or surgery doesn't really heal people. It could cure a disease in the moment, but it doesn't heal them. So I'll share a few stories with you, scientifically accurate stories that show you that love is the most important power in the universe. Number one, he said, we always think that while you get sick because you're exposed to bacteria or virus, right? That Louis Pasteur taught us. But it's actually not true. Exposure to bacteria, viruses, and other pathogens may be necessary, but not sufficient to cause this illness. For example, most people who test positive for being infected with tubercle bacillus never develop tuberculosis. Most people who are infected with influenza virus do not get the flu. Defenses are enhanced and buffered by love and relationships. Bacteria, viruses, and other microorganisms must first penetrate through our immune, neuroendocrine, and other defense systems. And the way you develop your immune system is by love. The way you weaken your immune system is by what? Stress, agitation, worry, conflict weakens your immune system. Love, intimacy, warmth, touch strengthens your immune system. Well, I'll show you a few examples, right? Even Louis Pasteur, how about Louis Pasteur? Even Pasteur changed his thinking later in life and believed that germs are only part of the picture, that other factors usually played an even more important role. According to legend, Pasteur said on his deathbed, the microbe is nothing. The soil is everything. So how you develop your immune system is what decides whether you get sick or not. It's not the only thing. There are germs. You could, if we actually injected you with some, AIDS virus, you're probably going to die. But this is an interesting story, men and women. Researchers from Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland studied almost 10,000 married men with no prior history of angina, that is chest pain. Men who had high levels of risk factors such as elevated cholesterol, high blood pressure, age, diabetes, and electrocardiogram abnormalities were over 20 times more likely to develop new angina during the next 5 years, right? Except, however, those who answered yes to the simple question, does your wife show you her love, had significantly less angina even when they had high levels of risk. Is that interesting? He began to study all these things when he was talking to his patients. Men who had these factors but did not have a wife who showed her love had substantially increased angina. Almost twice as much, almost 100% more men would get heart attacks or chest pain if their wife didn't express love to them. Right? The greater the cholesterol and blood pressure and the greater the anxiety and stress, the more important was love of the spouse and buffering against these harmful effects. Right? So it could be you don't have a wife, especially if you're already a woman. So there's other things too. Not everyone has a wife, right? But there are other types of social support that are very important. So there's many kinds of social support. For example, if you became ill, is there a friend who would drive you to the hospital? Or would you have to take a taxi or an ambulance? Do you have somebody who would actually drive you to the hospital or help you take care of your kids or come and be with you or something like that? They said they would ask people these questions. If the answer was no, no one would help me, then they would really worry about those people. But if people who had someone who helped them to take care of them, that made a big difference in their healing and recuperation. Listen to this one. Women with metastatic breast cancer were randomly assigned to two groups. Both groups received conventional medical care such as chemotherapy, surgery, radiation, and medications. In addition, One group of women met together for 90 minutes once a week for a year. Patients were encouraged to come regularly and to express their feelings about the illness and its effect on their lives in a supportive environment that felt safe enough for them to express what they were really feeling, including their fears of disfigurement, of dying, of being abandoned by their friends and spouses, and so on, right? So this was an actual strong study with clear understanding. The groups were led by a psychiatrist or social worker, plus a therapist who had been in breast cancer remission. So the therapist had already had breast cancer and then been saved from it, right? No one understands what it means to have breast cancer better than others who have gone through similar experiences. So here's the result. As a result, a strong sense of community and intimacy developed. Although the word love was not used in the journal report, as in most scientific publications, one could say that these women began to love and care for each other. The groups continued meeting once a week for just 1 year. Now listen what happened. 5 years later, Dr. Spiegel told me, he's the one who did this study, I finally got around to looking at it today and I almost fell off my chair. Those women who had the weekly support group lived on average twice as long as in the other group of women who didn't have the support group. All of the women in the comparison group who did not have a support group were dead after 5 years. Isn't that amazing? So he said, this is what I'm discovering, that when people feel love and people feel support, their immune system, their ability to fight a disease becomes much stronger and actually can heal you better than if you're lonely or miserable, right? The only women still alive were those who had received a weekly group support session. So after 5 years, the only women still alive were the ones in the support group sessions. Also, the time interval from first metastasis to death was significantly longer in those who had received the weekly support group. So he said, look, here's a problem with modern medicine. Why aren't we prescribing, actually, by the way, Kaiser and other groups do, why aren't we prescribing support groups for women who are ill? It's sometimes more effective than chemotherapy or other types of therapy. Okay. So you can read this in Living Beyond Limits if you want. Okay, here's another one. One of the earliest and most important studies, this is for everybody, by the way. If you're not married and you don't have a support group, what are you going to do then? One of the earliest and most important studies recognizing the power of love in relationships to modify the harmful effects of otherwise unhealthful behaviors was Roseto, Pennsylvania, an Italian-American town in eastern Pennsylvania. Roseto has been studied intensively for over 50 years. The population of Roseto was found to have a strikingly low mortality rate from heart attacks during the first 30 years it was studied. That's why there were several towns, we'll read about in a second, they all had different levels of heart attacks, right? When compared to Bangor, an immediately adjacent town, and Nazareth, another nearby community, the risk factors for heart disease such as smoking, they're Italians, high-fat diets, diabetes, and so on were at least as prevalent in Roseto as in Bangor and Nazareth. But here's what they discovered happened, right? All three communities were served by the same hospital facilities, water supply, and physicians. So all the same. There was only one difference. Why was the incidence of heart attacks so much lower in Roseto? This is why. At the time, Roseto, which had been settled by immigrants from a town in southern Italy in 1882, was still displayed a high level of ethnic and social homogeneous, close family ties, and cohesive community relationships. That is, they all spoke the same language, ate the same kind of food, went to each other's houses, were kind to each other, loved each other, had parties, drank wine together, including, and this is very important, listen to this, including 3-generation households with strong community commitments to religion, relationships, and traditional values and practices. That means there were Italian Catholics who believed in marriage, believed in grandpa, grandma, parents, children all living together, grandparents talking to the kids, kids talking to the grandparents. Isn't this what Reverend Moon teaches you every single day? 3-generation relationships are the road to the kingdom of heaven, and by the way, save you from heart attacks. Okay? In the late 1960s and early 70s, Roseto shifted and began to practice a less cohesive, fragmented, isolated community. This loosening of family ties and weakening of the community in Roseto was accompanied by a substantial increase in deaths due to heart attacks, as researchers discovered. We have a community here. We should take care of each other in our community. That's why we're going to have a dinner this Saturday. That's why we're having a baby shower this Saturday. It's not just to have a baby shower or get toys or something for a kid. It's not just to eat surf and turf. It's to share with each other, share love with each other, talk to each other, be there for one another, and develop a heavenly community. Does that make sense? So we say this. God is the origin and designer in the universe. You and love of others creates health and long life. Why? Because you were designed for love. That's why. You were designed to receive love and to give love. You were designed for it. That's why we say Marxist socialism is a lie and is 100% untrue. And what Jesus taught, what true parents taught, what the saints taught is 100% perfectly true. Right? Love heals you. Love protects you. Love makes you happy. Right? This is the language of God, and this is the language of religion, not atheism. Here's an important part. What if you're alone? What if you're not married? What if you don't have a community? What if your kids all join the military? And you can't see them so often. Yeah, who would have thought that? You can be alone, but not lonely. And this is a really important part of this sermon and understanding. God is the source of all love. It'd be great if you have a wife who shows you love all the time. If you do, God bless you. I'm grateful for my wife, right? It'd be great if you have a husband who shows you love all the time. But really, the source of all love is really God. This is Jesus, right? Luke 6:12. One of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. When morning came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them. So, what does this mean? In the morning, at night, when he was praying on the mountain, he was by himself, right? But was he lonely? No, he had God with him. He felt the love of God, the guidance of God. And then, the next day, then he called the 12, come and be with me now. I wanted to be alone with God in prayer. That's what I wanted to do. We as a community need to learn to be alone with God in prayer and receive the love of God. There's no other way. There's really no other hope. If you must find the love of God through your prayer life, and when you find that love, you can be able to give love to others, right? Reverend Moon teaches, does love exist for the purpose of giving or just for receiving? The essence of loving is giving. What about here in America? When you women get married, do you say, I'm married because I want to give love? Or do they feel I want to receive love? Right? We say harmonious give and take action is the power of the universe. So Jesus taught us, for whatever you give, so shall you receive. If you want to receive love, the truth about love is you have to give love. If you want to receive love, the truth of love is you have to learn with your intellect how to love other kinds of people, right? Do to others as you would have them do unto you. This is the gospel. This is the absolute truth. Reverend Moon would say, learn to live for the sake of others, and everything will be returned to you, right? For every action, there's equal and opposite reaction. Actually, the law of physics, but it's the same law as spirituality. Amen? Amen. Amen. God bless you. Thank you for listening to me. I hope you had a good time.